Good afternoon. We're going to resume our penultimate session. So this session has been named Internet Measurements. So we're going to discuss all the actions that are implemented to improve Internet measurements, statistics, and such. So today we're going to talk with Dieudonné Munganga, who's going to tell us about DRC. And then we've got François and Jean-Baptiste, who will be telling you a little bit more about ARDA and the ARDA project, and how we as the Internet Society are helping with this project. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Dieudonné Munganga, who will take the time to introduce himself, I'm sure. Dieudonné, you can choose which language you wish to speak in and which language you're doing your presentation in. Perfect, thank you very much. I can't see my slides. There we go. So I'm going to try and present in French, since we've got a lot of people here in French. Apologies if some technical terms don't come to me in French, but yeah. I generally present in English, but today I can do it in French. So thank you for the opportunity that you're giving me here, presenting at the Central African Peering Forum. My name is Dieudonné. I've just finished my master's in computer science in Cape Town, and during this endeavor, I worked with a lot of organizations on the internet, like the AFRINIC. I was working on the MIRA project. We were measuring internet resiliency in Africa, and in 2021, I was also part of the Earlier Career Fellowship organized by ISOC, and I've also been working with the WWW Foundation as a data analyst. At present, I'm working as a software engineer with DevBox. It's an automation company for Southern Africa networks. So, as you know, the internet is a precursor element these days, especially after COVID. We saw how important the internet is, and we realized the penetration rate in Africa. We're not where we want to be, but it is evolving. There's much more internet traffic. So we'd like to arrive at, we've got 80% via mobile phones. Even though there is this evolving penetration, there's enough efforts that are done so that there's even more positive results and internet ports. So these efforts to see improvement in internet performance and penetration, we can't really have a better performance if we can't measure what we're talking about. So that's what it says here in this saying in 1883. So I could summarize the saying by saying that if you can't measure what you're talking about and put it in numbers, then you can't really claim to have knowledge on it. So the idea is to express your knowledge of the internet with figures so that you can understand what is going on performance-wise, and then you can start trying to improve it. So, following this study, we decided to focus in DRC, and we saw what was already done. There was a lot of work by ISOC that focused on internet resiliency per country. And we can see that figures in DRC aren't particularly interesting. So what we saw was there were some problems to solve. There's a lack of data on the internet in DRC, and there's an absence of probes or transparent data sets. So we're missing ripe atlases, for example. There's only one. There's a lack of scientific research and scientific publications that cover the state of the internet in terms of structure. And there's also a lack of funding in that research aspect. That's where I see, and took my motivation from. That's why I started doing the work I did. So what were the goals of the study? Well, you see 4 here on the screen, and the idea was to have an investigation on the Congolese internet structure and the state of network interconnections. The second goal was to assess and quantify these networks and to measure the quality of service of these networks from the user's perspective. And thirdly, we wanted to measure the user's quality of experience on the web, so as they are accessing the service. And finally, our final goal was to analyze the network traffic destination, see when and through who each network the traffic goes through and such. What's the latency and other criteria. So in terms of objectives, we had different objectives. We wanted to analyze publicly available data sets based on BGP, for example, or data that is publicly available on these data sets, and the use of APIs. So we wanted to consume these data sets. We also ran a little survey of the perception of the users to guide the measurements we were doing on some networks to understand the quality of the different networks. We also decided to run active measurements in DRC, and we tried to identify the mostly accessed websites and measure web quality of experience, QoE. And I'll show you some of the figures in the next slides. And finally, we ran an analysis of destination traffic destination, sorry. So this is, in this slide, you just get an overview of everything I've just told you about. All the different data sets we used, all the different sources, and the data pipeline that received all the data from our different measurements, from the different users, through different groups. We used MLab, for example, and we were asking participants to run some of these exercises or measurements on their laptops. And then we decided to do this 3 times a day to get more representative data that represents the real situation. And we ran this during 4 days. So there we have it. So our first analysis of secondary data that we ran was to try and establish and understand what the market structures is like. So we had ASNs in the country, which ones they were, and to try and understand the providers, the transit of these ones, and the customers. So that is for ASNs, the networks. And then we used the CAIDA dataset. It's an organization that is known in internet measurement industries. And from this, we understood, which you see on the left here, for example, for Celtel DRC, there are more customers. 10 ASNs that were customers with Celtel DRC, those followed by Certel. So you had like an interesting distribution that we kind of established through the measurements. And what you see on the right is a comparison and correlation between ranking of the CAIDA and the number of prefixes per ISA. So to have better, closer rankings, we needed to see how that was correlated to the number of prefixes. And we saw this during the BGP sessions. We also wanted to figure out the ASN degree or the total. So this incorporates both the numbers, direct or indirect, of links that this ASN has. So we wanted to understand this structure first and foremost. Next slide. And then we wanted to understand the interconnections that exist in the country per region. And there's a metric called AS hegemony. It's used in by some researchers in South and maybe even North Korea. It gives a score to each network, and it focuses on connectivity importance in the country. So you've got the different BGP sessions in the country. Obviously, you've got ASN filters in DRC. And depending on the frequency of the ASN during the different BGP sessions, then they determine a score per ASN. So what you see here on the right, you can see that the little red circle is the size, and the size of the letters shows how important this ASN is in terms of connectivity of the different users and clients. But if you tests of the interconnections in the country and outside of the country, so the red links are the connections between networks that are local. So you could see different, Airtel has more local connections in red. So that's a very influent one. So that's why we're making it bigger on the screen. But I don't know if it transpires on the screen here as well. So we tried to have different communication posts too. So in green, that's the connections of those networks outwards. So you can see for DACOM, there's only one cell. It's a local one, it's red. that's connected to DRC ISPA, and it's connected to different networks that are external, outside of the country. And here, for example, we may see that you've got Sartel and you've got different connections towards ASNs outside of the country. Next slide. In yellow, sorry, you've got Tier 1 networks that are also available. And you can see in the orange, it's the only network that is connected to the traditional network, the Tier 1. And I think back in the day, it would have been considered the backbone of the internet, although Tier 1 now it's changing, obviously. And so once we understand these local and foreign connections, we then try and study peering data and IXPs to try and understand how Congolese networks can leverage and use the peering infrastructure in the country. So, for example, if we focus on IXPs, in DRC, we've got some peering. There's 4 IXPs. So the first one is Kinix, Lubix and Gomix, and Goma and Lubici and Kinshasa. And what we show here is the number of members that are connected. And we run an analysis on this. And Kinix has more members, followed by at that point in time, followed by Gomix, followed by Lubix, and then Gomix. So yeah, at the time we ran the analysis, Gomix had 7. But on the list of Congolese ASNs, there's still a low level of networks that use the infrastructure and IXPs as they're present in the country. So depending on different data sets like RIPE, at the time we found 44 ASNs in DRC. And that was in RIPE. But we only got 17 out of 44 of the ASNs, you know, only 38%, sorry, of the ASNs were interconnected to at least one IXP. And we also wanted to focus on eyeball networks. These are kind of networks that have users, most users connected are connected to this. You can see that the orange portion is still connected to each IXP. So this really shows that they do use the infrastructure that is in place. And it's in place to keep the traffic local. So once we grasped where networks were connected, we ran an analysis on the quality of services. And we tried to focus on surveys to collect the user's perception. We asked questions and tried to determine which network they were connected to, what the quality of the services is, if the customer is satisfied or not. And if they're not satisfied, then why? And what determines the level of their satisfaction. So the participants who responded to the survey reported at a rate of 32% not being satisfied. Only 30% claimed to be satisfied. So it was just a little survey to try and understand what they think when it comes to what they receive internet-wise. The next question we asked them was if they are aware of internet speed that is provided by the ISPs. Here, for example, we asked them, to the best of their knowledge, what they thought was the internet speed they received. So most say they just simply don't know, they're not aware, they don't know the speed that they get. And we can see 28% maybe said move 5 to 10 megabits. Others said 1 to 3, you know, they weren't sure. And when you ask them questions around the speed that they think receive, because the first question was, what do you think is provided by the provider? And then what do you think you actually receive? So that's where most respondents said that they simply don't know. 35% seem to say that it was between 1 and 5 or 5 and 10. So once you start gathering, forming an idea around the user's perception, you can collect more active data. So in that case, we used Ookla, at least at the start. So we were asking users to run an Ookla test in the morning, at lunchtime, in the evening for 4 weeks, so that we could have accurate, reliable data. And it's something that the audience could easily interpret. You see, you had like a graph that gives you data at different points in time, at different levels. So the little line at the end gives you like the minimum speed, and the top one gives you the maximum speed, and the middle could be at 50% or at a certain percentage where the results sat. So what was the speed for upload and download? So here we can see that Orangekin and Goma had a better quality or better speed for download, between 38 and 35 mega per second. And in upload, Airtel in Kinshasa and Goma were leading, around 20 mega. So I don't know about other cities, but there's great variability between cities. There's different measurements, you know, and big cities like Goma are in the similar network, but there's different qualities of service. Next slide, please.
Now that we've looked at the upload and download speed, we consider latency. Quite often when using an Ookla test, servers measure this using ISPs. And there's not a very notable latency. you see that all latencies are under 100 milliseconds because servers are quite often local. But what is notable here is that when the measures itemize what goes towards other servers, as for instance, those that go into Kigali, you see that even if there's not such a huge difference, there are differences in terms of latency, i.e. time to connect to the server. It doesn't compare in the same way to connection to servers in the country, for instance, in Kinshasa. In previous data, we didn't have all networks. It didn't factor in the cloud data. We wanted to look at that as well. So to mitigate that, we're looking at other techniques in MLab, which uses a completely different methodology compared to UCLA, where servers are out of the IXP, in the sense that here the UCLA servers are in Nigeria, Uganda, South Africa, for instance. But we wanted to see what the experience was like when it's different, because internet is about accessing resources beyond your own IXP. So we wanted to observe this experience out of the country, since it's different from UCLA. And what we see here is that, considering the MLab methodology, there's no significant difference in between networks. We see that all networks struggle to reach 10 megabit per second, according to MLab's analysis. We understand that when users are in the country, the measure needs to reach an MLab server following the route. So it could have gone through a number of stages in terms of latency or bottlenecks. I'm sorry, I don't know the French term. So there are differences between MLab and UCLA collected data, depending on the location of the server and the methodology used in one way and the other. That's where there's debate about measuring internet and the tools to measure internet. What you see on the screen is not really the real latency. Even though, as you've seen previously, one had a better speed than others, the worst of latency, or the least good of latency, was around 350 milliseconds for users of DRC. For other networks that you see on the screen, latency remains below the 50 millisecond mark. So it's very positive. Now, quickly, to measure the quality of the experience online, we had to identify adequate metrics. To do so, we identified 4 metrics: the DNS time, resolution time, and time for first byte, the time for reception of a first packet by the DNS server. So we're looking at the full connection time to networks, to the BGP protocol. The data bank we were using looked at the most accessible sites. We needed that to be able to visualize. And what you can see here is that we're focusing, for instance, the one with the biggest bar is Facebook, for instance, and AM CDT. And the one that has the lowest resolution time is the most notable. It might have to do with where they are hosted. And Facebook, for instance, has a POP at the IXP. So the resolution time towards this websites is minimal, down to 0.0001 milliseconds. So it's almost instantaneous when people try and access it. And you see notable difference with other pages. Next slide, please. We can note the same thing here when we are measuring the total time and the TCP time. You can see variance here as well for sites with point CD. These sites with a point CD take a similar time compared to the TCP time. If you compare them to what one may consider as foreign sites. Most of the CD sites tend to actually be hosted abroad, even if they're very present on the relay point. So as a result, the experience is not necessarily great when people try and access these sites. Finally, to analyze, that's the best tools we've got to visualize the data. But once we've measured the quality of services, and before we look at interconnection, we wanted to understand where traffic goes. So we're looking at the routes within the network. So we collect public IPs from the networks and we cross-reference the information. And we notice, for instance, that if you leave a specific point, you're taken to a number of foreign countries before the packet reaches its destination. And when you look at the route, you encounter a number of latency periods. It can reach 1,000 milliseconds. For instance, if it goes through Kenya, and you see an example of route on the screen. And you may ask, why is it taking such a long route? When if people from these networks are there, they could maybe explain it. We've looked at the AFRICEL route, the CETEL to AFRICEL route, and it goes through 4 foreign networks located in 5 different countries. It goes through Liquid and its different ASNs, for instance. It goes to Nuke in Zimbabwe, through Zambia, just to come back to the DRC. And that's one of the points that requires much more studies to understand why the long routes. Same idea that you can see here on the screen, route from Orange to CETEL. The route is not quite as long as what we've seen. Orange to Vodacom also goes through South Africa, through Mauritius. So you've got the example for a connection between Orange and AFRICEL, where you've got an average latency of roughly 256 milliseconds. So there are Congolese networks, but that use the infrastructures in place, but not yet to the maximum. And what this study has shown is that users are reasonably satisfied, even through the perception they have. And that's what measuring tools show us. But there's a significant difference from town to town, even between users of the same network. What we've seen as well is that there is a significant impact that can be noticed when content is accessed locally. The case of Facebook, for instance, is interesting. We know that it has a POP and it makes a big difference. When there is a local POP, users are generally getting a much better quality of experience because there's no delay or hardly any. It's the same for Congolese sites seen from abroad. It could be coming with security problems depending on how it's accessed and through which route. We must ensure, therefore, that we have more local internet infrastructures and retained locally to preserve people from security breaches and to improve the quality of experience. Here are a few recommendations at the end that you can read at your leisure. Next slide. Here's a summary of recommendations for regulators. They should, if they can, ought to invest in order to have data repository through measurement to make sure that decisions are based on data and that they can do efficient reporting. This data would give them a better understanding of the networks. It's important to ensure there is a good local internet infrastructure for the benefit of users and for telecom operators. What we recommend is that since there's hardly any measuring tools, we invite networks to collaborate with academics doing research on this type of techniques which are quite innovative. And they're fighting to have these innovative techniques represented in the country because it can help improve the health of a network. Next slide. Last but not least, I would like to thank the colleagues with whom I am cooperating on this research project. In particular, people listed on the screen, because without them, I wouldn't have had access to the data. Josiah from Cape Town University, I don't know if he's here, and Christian Bigby, who helped us collect the data, so did Nicole. They gave us access to a local server in DRC at Chicken Eggs to carry out this data collection. So thank you once more for giving me the opportunity to take part. I hope that they were interesting points for you. And I hope that I've convinced you that having this type of analysis is useful and interesting, and I would be delighted to collaborate. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Round of applause for Dieudonné. Thank you. A very comprehensive presentation. And looking around the room, there were a number of questions, so I expect there'll be a fruitful discussion. I think we can talk about ADA before moving to questions. I'm going to quickly share.
Hello.
So as Dieudonné mentioned, when we cannot measure, we cannot improve because we don't know where to intervene. And it's a source of problem for the future. So the African Root Collector Data Analyzer, known as ARDA, that's the acronym, is a project that the Internet Society has developed with ISOC and with the IBEX, the Association for African IXPs. It's a portal where the data collected from these ISPs is centralized and analyzed to give an overview of internet from these IXPs. And it could even give you an analysis per country. The system enables you to approach it through different means. And you can get from the three DRC IXPs, get a sort of country picture to consider improvements for the whole country. And it could be useful for operators of IXPs because then they can target interventions in order to improve the quality of internet in this specific country. Currently, there are only 39 IXPs involved in the project. We'd like to see more joining. When we look at the number of IXPs in Africa, I think we have about 49 IXPs across Africa, so a number of IXPs are not listed on the ARDA website. That's the first point. The second point is that to harmonize data collection, we need to bear in mind that the system is based on PCH root collectors. So to be one of the IXPs listed on this system, you have to have root collector, PCH root collector. I think that when you look at Congo, if you check on the left, if you look on the left, I don't think Congo is on the list. You've got Angola, oh, you've got Benin, Cairo, Casablanca. CGX is not listed. I know that the servers from PCH have arrived and they are being installed. So as soon as they are installed, Congo will be included. The data from Congo will be featured on this system. So when you select an IXP, this is what you see. You've got a sort of dashboard with the ASP path length, so the length of the AS path. It's 1.2 in this case. The percentage of AS visible in this IXP. So if there were, let's say you've got 100 IXPs given to Benin, only 42 are present on this IXP. So it shows you also the number of visible prefixes, 173, and the number of members for this IXP is 5. You also have graphs, and if you move your mouse about, you can see more detailed information. So the number of ASN visible is 14. But if you look more closely, you'll realize that Benin, if we've got 42% of the ASN allocated to Benin, it means that there should be about 28, maybe 27, 28 ASNs allocated to Benin, meaning that there are some of these AS that are not yet connected to the IXP. So there's still work to be done there. You've got different ways to view data. You can view by nation. So let's select a country like Angola, which has 2 IXPs. You've got Angola IXP and Angonix. And from these 2, you're getting an overview of the situation for Angola. You could also select regional view. So you can look at Africa, Latin America, Europe. At the moment, what we're interested in is Africa, of course. So this is what the system looks like. Jean-Baptiste may be able to chip in to complete my brief presentation. The system was not operational for a while. It was fixed and it became operational again a few months ago, and we would like to thank the contribution thank ISOC for ISOC, AFRINIC and Namaste for their contribution. They collaborated to bring the system back online. So if you are interested in accessing data about a specific country, a specific market, don't hesitate to use this tool. Jean-Baptiste, do you want to add a few things? No? Right. So this gives you an overview of what we wanted to show you, and now we're going to move on to the Q&A. Let me check if there's any Q&A questions in the chat. Abdel Thibault is asking if it is possible to share the recordings. Yes, indeed, we will share these recordings, and you should be able to view each session. I do have a question for Dieudonné. Don't hesitate to fire away with questions. I will relay them. So Dieudonné, I do have a question for you. The hegemony of Celtel is notable, though I noticed that Celtel is not necessarily the one that is connected to the default zone. And so connected to the big international networks, it tends to be Orange that is in that position. So how do you explain the hegemony of Celtel in Congo? Is it due to investment in infrastructures, or is there something else behind this domination? Well, I would say that it's connected to infrastructures. What I'm aware of is that the AS hegemony methodology is looking at BGP sessions, and it looks at the frequency at which the SN intervenes or appears on the IXP. I'm not sure I'm the best place to tell you exactly why they feature so significantly, but I reckon that it's down to the number of prefixes that are featured on the route. Many of them go through Celtel, so I'm not sure it really fully answers your question, but that's as much as I can contribute based on my knowledge. Okay, thank you. Another question. There's a low proportion of AS present in IXPs. I think you mentioned 48%. Why are there so few on IXPs? What's prevents them from joining, from connecting? Is it a lack of information? I think more efforts were done to promote peering. Our study needs to dig further so that we understand better why, from the perspective of telecoms, they're not so interested in peering. There are also other business-related realities that may come into play. It might explain for the fact that some ASNs are not open to connected because of the requirements. I think Mr. Nico might be able to add his views. Okay, thank you. As soon as he raises his hand, I will invite him to take the floor. Thank you. I also have a question, which is more general. It's not necessarily connected specifically to this connection. How can a young person get involved in research, especially in your field in measuring internet? How did you get started? How did you get involved in this academic field? And what would you say to a young scholar interested in this field? Well, that's a very good question. It's actually the question I asked myself before I started my PhD. And just to give you an anecdote, I was also looking into what field to focus for my master's. And I asked the question of the MLAP mailing list, who do a lot of measurement, and I asked whether it was worth studying this field further. I wasn't sure who was involved in the mailing list, but I came across a number of research active academics who have a lot of knowledge in the field, and they invited me to take part in a meeting, and they helped me to get a foot in the door. This is how I got started. This is my own story. Now, if you want to do research, a number of people are already working in the field, and bodies like ISOC, who are very heavily involved and who are open and interested in guiding and supporting any young researcher. It's really fascinating. A lot has been done and can be done to collaborate for those who are, for instance, focusing on programming, because you can develop tools that use all the data we're measuring, we're collecting, to help the regulator or the authorities you're working with better understand what is generally happening through the collection of data. So we're open, myself or bodies like ISOC. You probably know quite a few people who are working in the academic field of measurement, and I would really encourage people to look into it, especially looking at and studying at telecom networks.
Thank you very much. Nico also raised his hand. Before giving him the floor, maybe there's a question that I could ask as a follow-up. So this research, was it a one-off, or do you intend to keep researching on DRC? I would like to continue. The only thing is that there isn't necessarily enough support in our activities. I do it for Congo. I would like to continue, but there might be other aspects of my life and work that I have to focus on. But if I could find the right collaborations, I would be happy to collaborate and share the code I use to get access to this data. Or I like participating in different projects and helping launch certain projects. But I think because of the lack of support, sometimes we just can't do everything we want to. The risk of repeating myself, to see improvements, we first need to have measurements, understand what is there so that we can then improve things. Otherwise, we're going to acquire investments, but not on facts. And we won't be able to reflect the experience of the users. Nico? To answer the question on apologies, the interpreter cannot hear the speaker. The speaker sound is inaudible. Nico, we can't hear you. I'm sure interpreters aren't able to interpret your question. Could you maybe go to a place where you can be heard properly? We've got 15 minutes left for this session. We can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Try and find a spot where you've got a good environment to be able to talk. Maybe he could type his answer in the chat. Yes, that's a good idea. You could type your answer in the chat. Perfect. Are there any questions in the room? Any questions in the room? So, as I was saying earlier, thank you, Dieudonné, for your presentation and the work you've done. I saw earlier you mentioned content hosting issues. Would you be able to talk to us a little bit more about this? I also gathered that you've mentioned time and latency and accessing certain services. Could you touch upon that also, please? Okay, yeah. So I don't know if I need slides for this, but the idea towards the end, I think, of my slides. So around data, one more. Yeah, that one. So as I was saying, the idea was to measure different metrics using the data sets that we had, the database that were being accessed by users. So what we tried to elaborate on was that after our analysis, obviously, of the identification of the network and the websites, we found that the websites that were hosted still have a company, a foreign company as a renter. This does not appear or doesn't have the same resolution time or the same TCP time compared to the Senate. There's a resolution time that is more reasonable for the Senate compared to the other data sets, for example. You can also see here that the data is differentiated and split up per color. Here, this is different categories of websites that we were measuring. There are websites that are more geared towards downloads. There's different sites in purple. There's news sites. There's baiting sites, betting sites. So we wanted to understand what was the access, where is the speed, and what the speed is in each access to these websites. And we wanted to see if there was variance between different types of websites. And we obviously weren't going to provide an answer as to why, but we wanted to see websites that were supposedly Congo content and see what the performance was compared to other world websites. Thank you, Dieudonné. It was important for me to come back to this. Sorry, I can't hear. Can you hear me now? Yes. Yes, I can hear you. So thank you. So I was saying it was important for me to come back to this because I seem to understand that you had a comparison between domain names with generic domains or a domain name that was related to the CTTMD. So I thought that's what I understood. I could send you a link on which, I don't know if you know this already, there's a website called Dump Web something, Dump DNS. Yeah, yes, if you can share that, that would be great. Thank you. But so let's see, for Congo Brazzaville, I did a dump of the whole gov.cd route. And when you get all the data, when you retrieve all the data, you can see the differences between the hosting location and the secondary locations. Oh, that's interesting. So the dump gives you all the hosting, IP, reverse DNS information, net block owner, the country. It gives in the ICCTP and all that succession. But what you'll notice is that on the .cd, it doesn't work. So I was wondering, is that a configuration issue or is it a compatibility issue? I can't provide an answer re that, but I think it's something quite interesting. And I think it kind of follows on your research. It could be a follow-up study. Yes, there are a lot of fantastic things available out there when you start doing measurements, especially for .cd. And so it's just that that's not what we focused on with the studies, and obviously we couldn't introduce everything. But I'm sure that there's a lot of improvement that could still be done. But originally it wasn't part of our research questions, and that is why we decided not to focus on that. Well, I completely agree that we could, obviously, yes, there are possibilities to dig deeper. Perfect, thank you very much. My other concern was around the fact that from what I gathered, I'm just going to try and make sure I've understood things clearly. So internal networks to communicate go through third-party networks. Could you show us the slide again? Do we have time? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that slide, yeah. So here, my first question is, what tool did you use and what is the frequency of the retrieval of the traffic that you ran? So we have 13 routes. So you connected IP addresses, public ones, through this map to find public addresses for the different ASNs. And through that, we ask the users, preferably 3 times a day. As you know, obviously, in terms of participation, we depend on everyone's availabilities. But we ran this during 2 weeks, especially around traffic. And for example, to get the middle latency, we tried to see latency between these 2 networks and kind of came up with a median value. That's the approach we adopted. So I wanted to complete Nico in the explanation. There's one big part of this that is the legacy of the networks. So what happens here is that we had operators that arrived, but then were bought out by others, but benefited from the infrastructures on which they hadn't contributed or hadn't made enough modifications. We could find routing paths that seem illogical in the way it's done, in the way of thinking, but there is an explanation if you take into account history and the old way of doing things, especially when back in the day we had certain hubs for exiting traffic. Perfect. Thank you very much for that clarification. I think that's quite interesting. I think it's that in that respect also where we need to check the quality of peering that is done at each of these points, because the networks I was trying to analyze were all eyeball networks. And as I saw, these are interconnected with IXPs, but we kept seeing that there were packages that go through multiple foreign networks. That's strange. And so this calls for a deeper study. I think we need to focus maybe on, as you said, configurations or the peering and how it's done. And the setup, maybe. I think it kind of raises a lot of questions. And maybe we could run a study on this to try and compare the different ways of doing things. I'm just wondering. I'm saying what I think right now. Yes, you're completely right. I mean, I would maybe suggest a tool, MPR or MTR. Yes, I know that one. So the advantage of such a tool is that it gives you the different seals, the losts. And if there's a network saturation, it can give you the loss rate. So it's not very precise, but it gives you a kind of rough idea of loss on a node. And It gives you different average figures on traffic. I use it quite a bit when I run investigations, when I try and understand what's happening in a specific area. It's quite a useful tool. You know this one? Yeah. The thing is, with this one, is that you have to consider the ease of how easy it is to share the tool with participants in research. Often we want to use all of these websites and all of these things, and everything has to be done automatically, relatively easily, can be shared easily with users who will be participating. If I run the analysis myself on a computer, it's much easier than when I have to rely on many various participants who have different varying degrees of experience, especially when technical skills. So sometimes if the pathway is a little more complicated, maybe it's harder for some participants. So thank you very much for your contributions. It's very interesting to have these discussions today. Nico, I think, had his hand up. Nico? Nico? Can you hear us? In the meantime, Jean-Baptiste, did you have something you wanted to add? Can I take the floor? So what I was saying was I could answer 3 of the questions around the number of ASs. There's AS of companies. And it's difficult with competence. Then there's the level of companies and restrictions. Apologies, there seems to be train announcements in the back and I cannot hear the speaker very well. So there's different operators. We call these clandestines. Stowaways, and there's competition. So to connect to an IXP, you need to follow the rules in the country, and if there are specific rules, some people's might not join. There's a small number of companies, state companies, public companies who have ASs that heads of IT parks forced companies to buy. But they don't use all of this. Recently, I found a company, and you're going to be shocked, who don't have resources, and they still spend $10 million per month to get IP addresses that are then rented elsewhere. Do you understand the situation? This is the kind of situation we're facing. I also wanted to reflect on the final participation. There's different problems. And I think companies need to figure things out. Apologies, there's announcements in the back. I cannot hear the speaker. So peering decreases the volume of transit that is sold to operators. There's technicians that figure things out to satisfy the providers at an international scale so that they also keep prefixes so that the traffic goes through that option. But that's a problem with behavior. And we need to find a solution to maximize positive effects. Because if not, clients will be leaving the company to get best services. That's just what I wanted to say. Thank you very much, Nico, for that contribution. We are now going to move towards the end of our session. Jean-Baptiste, I think you had your hand up. Any further comments? Thank you very much, Guilain. Thank you to Dieudonné for all the work that you've done. I wanted to salute all of this. It's a very good example of how we can better understand the behavior of traffic in a country. So here you did your expose on DRC, and this allows us to better understand certain issues. And what I would maybe wish is for us to try and see how we can scale this up and do it in other countries. And maybe next time we have the Central African Peering Forum, maybe we could exchange around the real situation of the internet ecosystem in different countries, to Congos, Rwanda, Gabon, Cameroon, and you know, we could have all the different countries that make up our region. I think it'd be an interesting initiative. With time and efforts, we could keep working on it so that we can maybe have in each country. I can see Serge Parfait, who's interested in these different questions. But yeah, I think there's different students who might be following our discussions. It's a topic that I think is or should interest people in these countries. And so maybe next time we could dig deeper in the situation in different countries, maybe provide recommendations. So congratulations to you. And depending on your availability, I think we could maybe work and have different volunteers in different countries who could work on specific issues. But yeah, it was just to salute the work you've done, just because Guilain's given me the floor before closing the session. I just wanted to take a chance to say that today we get to discuss different issues, things that are pertinent to the region, but not only. And that there are different types of events like ours, and we would invite you to go to these events. The next one is in East Africa. I think you'll be entirely on West Africa. And I think it focuses on the issues in West Africa, but you know, the questions of peering and the issues that we've raised exist elsewhere, but maybe they have different approaches. So I would encourage you to participate to these events. So I think information will be available soon, and we will communicate on that. We would invite you also to AFPIF, so the African Peering and Interconnection Forum. It's the annual meeting point of all the different stakeholders of internet ecosystem, but at a different scale. And they all meet to discuss wider issues or issues on a wider scale. So we saw this morning, you know, there's different discussions, and we could discuss IXPs on the entire continent and the state of the internet best practices. So every year, AFPIF organizes this, and this year it's in Accra in Ghana on the 22nd and 23rd and 24th of August in Accra. And before that, on the 21st of August, there'll be a closed meeting for operators. So those who are IXP operators, we would encourage you to participate in all events. As usual, we will have on-site parts of the event, but there's always the opportunity to join online. To say that even if we can't travel, we can still contribute and be together and have discussions, be it for speakers or participants or panelists. Everyone is welcome either on site or online. I might stop here, just say thank you again and give the floor back to Guilain. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, JB. for this information. I'm not going to repeat things after you. I just wanted to mention something about research around internet measurements. We've been discussing this at ISOC, but we want to encourage local communities in Central Africa, but also in Africa, to invest a little more in research, to better understand how things work, where there's problems, where we're struggling, where the issues lie, but all that focusing on data. So we hope to find students who are interested in doing all of this to kind of strengthen this this field and gather data, study data, just like people that we've seen explain today. So yeah, I can only put the call out to students to kind of start doing internet research and internet measurements. And I think that this will help us improve the situation. Thank you very much, be it here in person or online. Thank you to all the participants.